My wife and I were desperate. We had nowhere else to turn. So we decided that we were going to give this program, a detox program, a go. So we took our family home, we put a couple of used saunas in there, and I spent a whole year treating patients with this. The treatment protocol calls for about a year of going into sauna treatments every day. You'd exercise, you'd take a lot of niacin, which would dilate your blood vessels and help you to sweat. And then you spend about 5 hours in a 180-degree sauna, sweating, okay? And within a few days, I started seeing miracles happen. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. I've been a doctor for over 40 years. And I love my work, I love my practice. But I've never seen anything remotely as dramatic as that. And I had, it's a shame that this thing won't play one of these videos, because I have pictures of 3 ladies that had just absolutely amazing results from their treatment. We call them the 3 amigos, and their results were wonderful. I'm looking for somebody I'm not seeing over here, but anyway, one of the ladies actually that was here today actually knows one of these people. Okay, so well, let me jump back and go. They say no effective treatment has been identified for Gulf War illness. And here's another statement that says that the studies were not designed to help the veterans; they were designed to make it look like nothing, that they had nothing. So the problem that we found with this is that, number one, none of our patients had any money. None of them had insurance, and also we were doing this largely pro bono. And the second thing was, we learned from the Gulf War studies as well as our own experiences that those people that could afford studies, the studies didn't show anything. It took specialized studies, very expensive specialized testing to be able to show that there was actually problems occurring. So, okay, here's, during the course of this, and here's the politics of it, and here's where the real frustration comes in. The federal judge who was in charge of this case set up a situation where a class action lawsuit could be filed, and rather than people going into court individually, they could go in as a class. And if you met certain criteria, you could receive some compensation for your illness. And he appointed 19 attorneys to what was called the Plaintiff Steering Committee. And the Plaintiff Steering Committee negotiated with BP and decided what illnesses were going to be considered compensable, which illnesses you're going to be able to get money for a BP syndrome. There were 2 classifications, there were 2 categories of this. One was the compensation for material losses for businesses and so forth, the fishermen and so forth. And the other one was for health issues. And under the health issues, they had 2 categories. One was acute problems, the other was the chronic problems. Well, I didn't treat the acute problems because all of my patients were at least a year away from the spill with their illnesses. When they came out with the symptoms that they were going to compensate people for, they had a preliminary report. None of the top 10 illnesses that I saw were included in the report. And this isn't me making up these illnesses. This is going into every one of their records and taking out the most common symptoms that they had and putting them in order and so forth. And so nothing over there was going to be compensable. Now, when you're making your comments about knowledge is power, I learned when I was in the Louisiana legislature, I went there thinking knowledge was power. I left there saying money is power, okay? Because that's where it's all about. The people that have it, it's a golden rule. The guys with the gold get to make the rules. And certainly that was a situation with this situation also. Now, my best friend is this gray-haired attorney over here. His name is Leroy Hartley, a wonderful guy. He's worked with me on a lot of different missions in years past, trying to do-gooders and so forth and get good legislation and various and sundry things accomplished. And Lee was assuring me that the federal judge in this case was an honest and honorable man, and we were counting on that to be the case. Well, the federal judge, I wrote 5 different letters to the judge, and I explained everything that, and then he and I went to the court hearing where they were deciding whether or not they were going to accept this agreement between BP and the attorneys for the things that were going to become principal for BP syndrome. And it was obvious at the hearing that he was not going to be taking the side of the plaintiffs, he was going to be taking the side of BP and do this. So when he eventually made his ruling, I took all of my data, thinking I could do this overnight. It took me about a week and a half of every afternoon after work of taking my data and abstracting the illnesses from it and coming up with this report. And so over here, you look at the symptoms that they had. And by the way, that's basically the same symptoms that people have with BP syndrome, with Gulf War syndrome, and so forth. So one of the things I want to point out to y'all, because it's a common comment that people make, and they talk about pulmonary problems, okay? I saw no pulmonary problems. I saw no chronic pulmonary problems. I saw a few acute pulmonary problems, but everybody that had acute pulmonary problems had cleared up. So almost every time I hear people discuss the exposure problems, they talk about the pulmonary problems, and that was not my experience. Far from it, because their pulmonary problems were way down the line of things that I saw. Memory loss was profound. I had a really interesting experience a couple of weeks ago. I had a young lady come to the office. Her mother had been a patient of mine since she was a child. And the child had a bunch of symptoms and had seen 5 or 6 different doctors and had not gotten any improvement with things. And so she brings it to her ear, nose, and throat doctors and they solve all the problems, obviously. Well, she just lucked up on that one because the child had classic BP syndrome. I went to my office and I printed out that little sheet that I've got on the slide right now. And I discussed it with her. And let me tell you what this lady did. And it was absolutely magnificent. I explained to her that since we didn't have anything to tie this to BP and the oil spill, that she probably was having a toxic exposure from a lot of other things because many other things can cause the same symptoms. So the mother went home that evening and had a discussion with the daddy. A lot of these people that had BP syndrome had blood sugar problems. Their blood sugar would bounce up and down, and blood sugar bouncing up and down frequently causes any ear problems and dizziness, which is something I recognized right off the bat. Everybody that came in our treatment program, the 113 people that came through the program, as soon as they got in the program, they were told to graze. I wanted them to graze. I wanted them to eat multiple meals, multiple times a day, small meals, but it was the only way to keep the blood sugar from falling down. And all of my complaints of dizziness and all went away almost immediately. So this mother had gone home that night and ran a 5-hour glucose tolerance test on the daughter, had a nice discussion with her husband, and when she came back the next day with the daughter and we went over the test results, and she did have some low blood sugar episodes, or she did have low blood sugar, and she said, the daughter said, I slept for the first time in several months. I had a good night's sleep. What the mother had to do was, when they went home, they discussed the fact that they had recently painted the bedroom about a year ago, right before the symptoms started. And they could still smell in the sheetrock some of the paint. And so she had her daughter sleep in the next room, and the child felt a lot better the next day. Now, one of the things we didn't talk about, we have a lot of endocrine problems with this, a lot of endocrine problems in children, too, things that we don't get to see. But we can tell you in adults and adolescents and so forth, the women have menstrual problems. A lot of men that we saw were impotent and so forth. It was a little interesting. Of course, I didn't press them in very much on that because it's a delicate subject for me to broach. But the wives would say more about it than the husband would actually say. And nobody seemed to be concerned about the embarrassment or anything because that fact was a fact. Well, anyway, this little girl had menstruated in 6 months. And so the mama told me the next day, she said, we decided we're going to tear out the sheetrock, we're going to put some paneling in. I said, well, the paneling can possibly cause some problems. So, and I also talked to her about how we used the sauna before, and so forth. Didn't go into great detail with it, but just told us how it would work for the people that I'd been treating. So when the mother came back 2 or 3 days later, they had, maybe a week later, to see how she had done. They had already, within 4 days, they had torn the sheetrock out and had put the paneling in the room. But when they went shopping for the paneling, the little girl got sick when she went with them from inhaling the formaldehyde or whatever else was in the paneling. And but when they came back 6 days later, I'll skip this part. The mother, in the meantime, had found a place about 50 miles from where they lived, where they had saunas, that they would let the daughter use a sauna. So she went to this health club or something, used a sauna. When they came back 6 days later, they had done all this work, completely revamped the bedroom, and the child was menstruating and felt perfectly normal again. This is a child that has seen multiple doctors, multiple times, and so forth. So it was absolutely, it was really a rewarding thing. It was the first non-BP person I treated with this. One of the things that people develop with this, and we would be seeing this if we had, we could have used these videos that I had, but they develop multiple chemical sensitivities. And things that may have never bothered you before, once you've gone through a toxic exposure like this, will suddenly bother you. So one of my patients, and this is a guy that I had to go through the program myself to administer the program. So I spent 25 days in the sauna exercising and sweating by myself. It was miserable. And the biggest thing was I was doing it on my own while I was working full-time at the same time. But one of the guys that came through the program with me, his name is Jory, and Jory is quite a character. He was nutty as a fruitcake. I mean, this kid was highly toxic before this, paranoid, walking around with a gun, threatening people, and so forth. And Jory went through the program and suffered during the whole program. Most people didn't suffer during the program, but Jory was severely ill with this. And when he finished up, he had done remarkably well. But at this time, Jory has multiple chemical sensitivities. He cannot put gas in his truck, in his van, because he's sick, so his wife has to do this. Every now and then he's a hardhead, and every now and then he tries to work with gas or something like that. He gets sick. He started having some severe seizure problems a while back, and the seizures were, he was in church, and in the Presbyterian church, I think it was, and he's having a seizure, and the guy, and the kid in the seat in front of him says, "He's talking in tongues, he's talking in tongues." And Joey said, "I'm not talking in tongues, I'm having a seizure." So you'd have to know Joey to see the humor in that. But anyway, it took us a while. He subsequently had seizures in his doctor's office, and it took us a while for them to realize that it was an aftershave that he'd been putting on, and so forth. He put it on before he went to church. He put it on before he went to see the doctor. Okay? So Jory has gotten progressively worse. I have another patient who is a master cabinet maker from Mississippi. I did not find, let me tell you, the big fault with this, the biggest fault, the doctors, okay? Nobody knows jack doodle about this. And everything I'm telling you would be news to any of the doctors in my community and any of the doctors that I know of. Anyway, to be honest with you, there are very few doctors that know anything about this or believe anything about this. And it's something that there was a little hostility towards me at first with this because of one of the hospitals definitely has some institutional bias, but not much in my community. Unfortunately, on the Alabama and Mississippi coast, they apparently have gotten to most of the ER people, emergency room people, and so forth, and they treat these patients horribly. This is not coming from me, this is coming from the patients themselves, who go in and have problems. Well, this one friend of mine, patients, because they're all my friends these days, the cabinet maker would go to work, started having these problems that he would lay on the floor. His wife would come home and he was laying on the floor. He couldn't move, he couldn't talk, but he could remember what was going on, as opposed to a true seizure where you lose your memory and so forth. And one of the guys, boy, Jory, called that stuck stupid, okay? John didn't particularly like that, but a better term is probably zoned out. The little girl that came to the office and did so well with removing the sheetrock and all, I called it zoned out, and that's a better thing. But the first patient I had with this was a guy that had been working on the site, and he's the guy that told me originally about the using millions of gallons of methanol out there, because he was on a ship that had 30,000-gallon tanks of methanol that they were using during the process. And he describes being on the porch of his home, looking out at his truck. He couldn't move, he couldn't talk, the door was open in the truck, the engine was running, and his son was walking back and forth past and talking to him, and he couldn't answer him, he couldn't respond to him. Poor John, and so that was the first case of this that I saw and heard about, but we found out subsequently quite a few people have it. The cabinet maker has graduated, and I have a beautiful slide of him having full-blown seizures over here, okay? In which he's sleeping on a recliner, he flips off the recliner on the floor, and the part I don't show in the film, which I can't show you, is him crawling out of the picture. That's the way he lives. Now, he was supposed to come to the program, a bit paranoid, and just decided he couldn't do the program. But the patients that we saw originally and treated had phenomenal results, and it was almost universal. A lot of them, when they went back home, developed the same problems, because a lot of them were fishermen and women, and this one family went home and they got sick immediately again. And they were able to buy, because they had some oyster leases and they got some money for losing their leases, they were able to buy some property in Alabama. So the family goes to Alabama, they are perfectly healthy. They come back and go to Venice, Louisiana. In this case it's Port Sulphur, which is close to the same place. And they get sick. The husband gets on the boat, he gets sick, they get off. Other families cannot afford to leave home. They can't sell their homes. The property, you're showing property values now. Who's going to buy a damn home in Venice, Louisiana right now? Nobody's foolish enough to do that. So, this man's picture, the man pictured here today is an 83-year-old friend of mine from California. His name is Kay Kilburn. Dr. Kilburn came down and did some objective studies. I told you that most of the studies that we get on people wouldn't reveal anything, but his studies were designed in such a way. He's been a toxicologist for many years. He retired from the Army as a major, and then went into toxicology. And he came down, studied people, and 14 of 14 people he studied were extremely sick. And he told me right before he left, he said, "Mike, I've been doing this for my entire career. This is the worst public health crisis I've experienced in my lifetime." He and I would love to have the resources to be able, not for us to make any money, trust me, to do studies on patients, simple studies. It would not be a tremendously expensive thing, but it'd be the type of thing, and I told him I'd make this offer to you, I'd ask him if it'd be okay, that you could come down and do studies on people and get objective evidence for illnesses. So balance problems, visual problems, reaction times, and many things like that could be tested and so forth, as he did when he came down initially. So if anybody's interested in having this done and can think of some funding sources for it, we'd be glad to come down here and work with you and do anything that we could to help you, because it's one of the few things. Now, would it be acceptable in court? These guys own the court, they own the judges, they own everything. So, but it would be some objective evidence. My dream in this has been all along to be able to write the next chapter in the textbooks, medical texts, showing doctors what can be done or what should be done in these cases, because they don't know, okay? It doesn't take a lot of us are influenced by people telling us things, people that we might respect and so forth, telling us this, that, or whatever else, and we tend to believe it. Well, we've been lied to, and lied to, and lied to, and lied to, and lied to over and over and over again. And, that would be the wonderful thing. One of the first slides that I saw over here was some original studies that were done, original hearings that were done over here, the first hearing that y'all had over here. And y'all had invited a dear friend of mine and one of my mentors, and her name is Wilma Subra. Wilma's a MacArthur Foundation, Genius Foundation, MacArthur Foundation Genius Award winner. Brilliant chemist and so forth, and environmentalist, and populist and so forth. And she's agreed to work with us in these types of things. I haven't talked about specifically about this, but I know she'd be first guy in line, because you was the first guy to come down here to address you guys in the first meeting you had. Okay, so this is Dr. Kilburn. He's raring to go. He's only 83 years old now. He's written a couple of books, Chemical Brain Injury and Moles and Mycotoxins. And here we are in Grand Isle, which is the only barrier island in the state of Louisiana. And we've got these shrimp. If you look at the gills of these shrimp, the black spots over here, this crud doesn't belong there, okay? But much of the shrimp population that we've seen over here, which is greatly reduced from what it was before the spill, much of the population has that type of material. Got all kinds of shrimp that don't have eyes and have been deformed in numerous ways and have various and sundry other horrible things expending from their bodies. Okay. Now let's see. Maybe we'll get right from this one. Now, this is my buddy, the cabinet maker, who has seizures doing this one. Okay. And here's what we saw in racing. These are the when I finished my I always at my home even I drink out of a quart mason jar, and so you have to hydrate yourself pretty much when you're in a sauna at 180 degrees for 5 hours. So we took everybody had a jar and put their names on them, and then when they finished up, they put them on the top of the 2 saunas that we used, and so there was 100-something of these jars when we finished up. And these are the 3 amigos, 3 ladies. One of them, one of these ladies had something like 17 chelation therapies performed, and then another, she had 10 hyperbaric oxygen treatments, and she did, and nothing worked for her, and she did extraordinarily well. And but when she finished with it and went home, she became ill again, and she's got the same problems. What was interesting, she had this facial twist, and you would really be missing a lot by not being able to see this this thing on tape. But her face was like she had a Bell's palsy or something. One side was completely paralyzed. When we finished up, she was smiling, her face worked beautifully. She had a friend that was one of the other amigos that she was very close to, and they're sitting there in their last interview. The friend could barely walk. She had weakness of one of her legs that was really profound, and when we finished up, she had a little numbness of one of her feet, and that was it. So I'm seeing things that I'd never seen before. We had 2 ladies with multiple sclerosis, and one of them could barely walk into the waiting room for an interview, initial interview. And when she finished up, and for her to exercise, the best she could do was walk with a matron in my yard to get her exercise. When she finished up, she was on the treadmill for 36 minutes, clipping it. And she's done extraordinarily well. Unlike the others, as far as I know, she is still well. Most of the others have developed this multiple chemical sensitivity problems. A second lady had MS, and we weren't treating them for MS, we were treating them for oil exposure, because they both had huge amounts of oil exposure. And when she came in, she was in a walker, and she was shuffling maybe 2 or 3 inches at best. She walked out. I know this sounds like some preacher telling me about the miracles that I've seen, but we saw this, I saw it, and we all experienced it. It was a wonderful experience. So we had 2 people. Dr. Kilburn had explained to me that MS is a new disease. There's nothing about MS in the multiple sclerosis in the history books at all. Nobody had it before. And they believe it's related to mold toxins, and this lady the first lady had a large amount of mold toxin exposure. And one of my last patients was a good friend of my wife and mine, who came by, and I didn't have any movies on her, so I just wrote that she'd been diagnosed with polymyalgia rheumatica, and then later with Hansen's disease, better known as leprosy. And when they told me, when she came back from a neurologist, he told her that she thought she had leprosy. I had to get a little excited because I was responsible for the program. It just so turns out that the National Center for Leprosy is in New Orleans, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, because we used to have the only leper colony in the country. in Carville, Louisiana, and they closed it down, and so the main headquarters stayed in Baton Rouge. And the lady assured me that that wasn't the case, and I didn't really need to do anything with it. Later, she was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis. She had seen 18 different doctors. This girl was sharp as a tack. She used to run 6 or 7 businesses at the same time. And she couldn't run anything. She couldn't remember anything. Her vendors would come in and say, Becky, what's wrong with you? You don't remember what Tony said you were usually on top of things. So she had been 18 different doctors, 40 different medicines, and multiple diagnoses. This is before and after on her legs. Now what had happened, once we thought she had Hansen's disease, she dropped out the program, and I didn't get to see her again. But my wife needed some notary work done one day, and so she asked Becky if she could meet us at a center that we were at. And so Becky came over, and she walked in, and she looked perfectly normal. I couldn't believe it, and because she could barely walk previously. And apparently the treatment had worked. And so she went to a neurologist, and a rheumatologist, I guess it was. And he raised all kinds of hell with her because she had stopped the medicine. Actually, it's an antimetabolite that's used to treat cancer. And he had her on that, and he raised all kinds of hell with her because she had stopped the medicine, even though she didn't have the disease that he'd given her the medicine for. And so Becky was not one to bite her tongue, and she raised hell with him back. And they got to be friends again. But here's what happened to her legs with this. And I was just fascinated when she came over and let me film her. And these are the differences that she had. So that's pretty profound. And 2 ladies with... Okay, and let's get to the politics of this because nobody gives a damn about any of these people. Here's a federal House committee that met in Houma, Louisiana. And I went to it, as I said, my wife was an Indian chief, a very prestigious person in the community, very active leader, and so forth. And here we have a lineup. About 3/4 of these people were people that were testifying on behalf of BP, and so forth. And here's my wife giving her part of the testimony, and her part of the testimony obviously was on health issues. When they finished up and they were asking questions, the guy that got most of the questions, the fellow who talked favorably about this fellow Feinsberg, who was the guy that was administering BP's program and was lying to everybody and cheating everybody out of stuff and so forth. And so there was not a single question asked of my wife about the health issues. That was the last thing they were worried about because these guys were politically, they had been taken to the outhouse or the Whitaconda house and told them what they had to do. So, and one of those people, by the way, is a doctor. To the best of my knowledge, and believe me, I know a lot about this, there's not been a penny paid by BP to any patient that I've treated for health issues. They have not compensated a single person with a single nickel for a single bit of illnesses. Now, we've had a couple of deaths in people I've treated. We've had these severe illnesses. This young boy, Joey, I was talking to you about, is incapacitated. He's got one problem after another. And I got a call from him a couple of days ago with some severe abdominal problems. I'm worried that he might have some type of GI problems that could be life-threatening. And got into I told him to go to the emergency room immediately with this. And if I could take care of all these problems, I'd be glad to do so, but I'm not qualified for this. So I think the bottom line is this. We had a British corporation that came to the United States, poisoned thousands of Americans, and literally destroyed our coastal environment. Our environment is not what it was in Louisiana, you can imagine. They put this dispersant on this crude oil, and they created a toxic mess. The combination of the dispersant plus the oil is said to be 50 times as toxic as either the oil or the dispersant alone, and so forth. And all of the care, all the health care that's being done for these people is being paid for by us. It's not that they're not just paying for it, we are paying for it. Fortunately for the guys in Louisiana, almost everybody that I've been treating that's disabled completely has gotten Social Security. Guys in Mississippi, it's a political thing, and they're not getting this Social Security. Okay, poor John, who's having seizures right and left, and sick as a dog. It's been 3 years with nothing. So he can't go to the hospital. He can't afford to lose his home. He's got a home and business. And of course, he can't work very much with his business. But these are some of the realities of life, and this is why I said the golden rule. The guys with the goal get to make the rules. Okay, everything I've told you today, including those clips. I think the clip on the Grosbois situation with it, the 60 Minutes report, probably isn't on there because I don't know if proprietarily I can do that. But the other things are on, the clips are on this, John Sieges and the Three Amigos, and I've got the letters that I wrote and a lot of what I've done in this issue. It's very simple, dr2 and you can put it up there. Okay, and this is about the plaintiff steering committee. Oh, one last thing on the politics. This plaintiff steering committee, this group of 19 attorneys, it turns out that one of the lead attorneys on this, what they call a co-counsel, and two head knockers on this, co-counsels, and one of them is the head of a large law firm. And this law firm represented a tremendous number of the fishermen that I treated, because the fishermen were the guys that had the boats that went out, put out the booms, and corral the oil, and got sick, and so forth. They made a lot of money doing that, and then, you know, it was all for naught because they lost their health and they're going to lose their lives, perhaps, in the future. Well, this attorney group covered almost all the fishermen. All the fishermen in my parish, in my community, they represented them. So when they came up with this agreement, the agreement that took all their patients, all their clients, who were my patients, and said their illnesses didn't exist, because they're not in the things that are compensable, which means that they didn't exist. So for the public record, there'll be no record of these people being sick. So you talk about cooking the books, they're well cooked. Plus, they got paid millions and millions and millions of dollars to take and shaft their own patients, their own clients, okay? And I'd say this in any public forum, facts are facts, and Roy would back me with this in a minute, because that's the case. The people that have been sick, they brought me the paperwork that says, look, we want you all to join the class so we don't have to go to court on this. And if they join the class, none of the illnesses qualify for compensation. So it's a raw screw job. And I hope, if anything, if nothing else, I've opened your eyes as to what you can expect. So Leroy actually has a master's in admiralty. If anybody could have made money on this thing, it would have been him. It's not what he does, it's not what I do. But, and he predicted pretty much what was going to happen. The only non-prediction that he had was saying that this federal attorney was honest, and I can't say that I agree with him, and he doesn't disagree with me too much anymore with this situation. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Have you noticed anything with mental illness?
Yes, irritability, memory loss, fatigability, I mean, just everything. I'm sure these people will have help me with it, stress syndromes, you know, so
like
forth with this.
stuff like that?
But I really haven't seen a lot of that particular problems. To be honest with you, and I haven't really thought about it, but these patients that I treated, most of them aren't coming back to me for anything. A lot of them have, those that I have followed up with still have symptoms. Most of them, thank God, have done a lot better. The ones that I have been following up with, that I'm close to, have remained ill. There's one young lady who has a genius IQ. She graduated from Louisiana State School for the Gifted. She worked in the spill. She was told that all of this material was safe. She was a cook. She mopped the floors at all the workers that were cleaning up boats and cleaning the slime and dispersing all off the boats. She mopped the floors barefoot. She washed the clothes of a lot of the guys that worked for them, and she cooked for them. And this little girl who's brilliant, on the bayou, we live on the bayous, and all the bayous have similar situations, because there's four directions, and it's north, south, east, and west. It's up the bayou, down the bayou, this side of the bayou, and the other side of the bayou. Okay, so you can't get lost on the bayou too badly. And Jamie, his genius child, has to call people on occasion to come pick her up because she can't find her way home. So that's the way they live. Jory and Jamie both tend to get sick at the same time. I was telling you about earlier that's been having all the seizures. And it seems to be when it rains, they both get sick. So the rain stirs stuff up. We don't know exactly what it is. But it's beside the point what it is. You're sick, okay? All the studies in the world aren't going to negate the fact that you're sick. So my position with this is, forget about all the damn studies that they've got ways to get around them. And they'll have ways to get around what I'm talking about. Let's do some studies on you guys. If we could possibly get some funding to do treatment, that would be wonderful. And I think what I've learned so far is something that you could probably do on a much smaller basis without having to go through a formal program like we had, because we had a formal program. There was a rigid program that you went through, and you had to dot your I's and cross your T's and so forth. I think the rest of this stuff would be available for people otherwise.
You know, Dr. Mike was really interesting what you were talking about earlier in your statistics and stuff. When the health department is doing health assessments now on us for Mayflower, and they just started about 4 weeks ago. But my personal experience, and I'm not sure about Ann's or the other ones that have been there so far, is that they are checking our ear, nose, and throat. And it surprises me that you are a ear, nose, and throat person, and you're telling us all these things. So, and they're saying that they don't really know what they're looking for, but they do know what they're looking for.
I've never looked in anybody's ear, nose, or throat from the oil spill that had anything wrong with it. So,
Well, see, they were looking at
well, but they should, okay, and they should look elsewhere. But not much is going to show up. I'm telling you, nothing's going to show up on these studies, okay? It's going to take the studies that Dr. Kilburn does.
So in your studies, are you talking about drawing blood and testing that? And all
No, I did about 100, I drew blood on about 100 people for volatile organic compounds, okay? And like I told you earlier, I didn't talk to a single person about the results. I'm not qualified in that area. It's not what I do. I'm a clinician and so forth. And I'm not treating a whole lot of people for these problems. Occasionally I had another man come in recently with classic BP syndrome. And I've been treating him, but we haven't been just at the beginning of this. And most of the people don't have enough money to bring this on for a prolonged period of time. They just don't have insurance, they're unable to work and so forth. This stuff hit a lot of people hard. I mean, they're just not able to do it. Yes, ma'am.
A couple of questions. One, did you use the Metamatrix volatile solvents profile?
Yeah.
You vet that, you think that's a good?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's a gold standard, I think, is from what I've heard.
Okay.
I wouldn't swear to that, though. But Dr. Subaru would be the guy you could speak to about it, because Dr. Subaru is the one who I'd send some of these to Merrily or the Louisiana Environmental Action Network. They pay for it. And the other ones, we go to Wilbur Subaru. And so I don't know who went to who, but I refused to do it because it's not my, I didn't want to be called in as an expert in something I didn't know.
And the other question was, the 3 ladies happen to be part of CHSL? Kendra or?
Well, no, but one of them lives in the same area as Kendra, and they're good friends. One of them was Kim Diagono,
Oh, yeah.
okay? Kim, I shouldn't use her name, but Kim went to, they had a condominium, and Kim was one of the people that his family had no money. And they had a condominium in Destin. And her third trip to Destin, every time she went there, she got sick. And she got sicker, but she didn't relate it to the swimming. And the third time she went there, it knocked her for a loop. And she came back, and she had every system you can imagine was out of whack. She saw all kind of doctors, got all kind of treatment, and so forth. Kim was another one that had to leave the program early, and I didn't get to see her finish the program. When I called her about a year later to see how she was doing, thinking that she probably was still sick because she hadn't finished, she was doing sensationally well, okay? Another one was a fisherwoman who I told you all had gotten really sick, and they bought a place in Alabama, and they do great when they go home. The third one of the 3 amigos was a lady with a twisted face, and she took a trip with the second one, and went to spend a couple of weeks with her in Alabama. Did very well when she was over there. And on the way home, she got sick again. Those couples had gone to I'm overstaying my welcome, I'm afraid right now, forgive me. I'll finish on this. These couples had gone to somewhere in Tennessee, and there was two couples, and it was the lady, the fisherwoman, and another couple, and her husband, another couple, had gone to Tennessee. And they got out of their car at their hotel, and both of them got sick. One of them started having bleeding from all over, the other one was vomiting and so forth. They were redoing, they were paving the parking lot, they were blacktopping the parking lot. Well, one of these ladies had read where BP has a huge asphalt business in the United States. They have this huge asphalt business, and BP also has been using some of the oil from the spill to make asphalt. I'm sure that the asphalt itself could have caused them to be sick, but you know, the potential for it being that is just adding insult to the wound. So, thank you so very much. I've been wanting to meet you guys. If there's anything I can help you with, this lovely lady over here, Miss Emily, can give you my email address and we can correspond with her and help you. Thank you.